Ryan, there's a lot here to discuss, and there's a ton of different ways we could take this conversation. So I'm just going to open it up to you initially. As a fighter, you see a guy doing this, you look at this in the headlines, how do you interpret it?
Well, on the one hand, I can see absolutely where he's coming from. I don't necessarily feel that he expressed it in the most, articulate way that he could. But, hey, man, Al is being Al, and I don't think it's unfair to say that he has a lot of ground to stand on. Again, the UFC is a private company, and just because you happen to have money doesn't mean that I'm entitled to any of it. That being said, let's take a holiday bonus for something like that, or an end of the year bonus. Let's say someone hits you up, you make $100K a year, and someone throws you an extra $12,000 at the end of the year. I feel like that would be, that'd be a nice thing. 10-12% of your actual paycheck would be pretty nice. If my bonus is 200% of what I'm actually being paid, either my boss is disturbingly generous, or, I might want to consider if I've properly negotiated my way or if I'm being paid properly in the first place. Because, when it comes down to the performance of the night stuff, on the one hand, the UFC has no obligation to do that, and it's very nice of them to be throwing out extra cash. On the other hand, it seems arbitrary sometimes, and even if it's not arbitrary, in a case like Al's, I would have immediately thought that, that particularly for finishing a tough guy like Diego, that he would get that, although over the course of history, nothing is guaranteed. But that's kind of the big problem, is that it comes back from an athlete's perspective. You have no guarantee. It's a difficult situation to be in, and when you consider the risk that people are absorbing by getting themselves into a mixed martial arts contest, it can be significant. Al had he had that knee injury, and obviously, the UFC was able to eventually, I guess, help him find some recourse with that. I'm not read into the details for, the hoops that he had to jump through or didn't have to jump through. But I know that if you're injured in the ring or in training, they'll help you out to a certain extent. I'm not exactly sure what that extent is, to be frank, because I've never had it happen. But I have had it happen before, where I put out probably about maybe $12,000, a little bit more, personally, for a fight against a guy named Alex White that was meant to take place in July of last year that ended up not occurring. And it's not Alex's fault. He ended up getting hurt. Sure, he was training hard for the fight. I was looking forward to it. Maybe 3 weeks out, you get the call and they're saying, hey, we can't. You can't get in there and fight this guy anymore. He hurt himself. And, well, the money's already out for camp. You only get paid on fight night if you show up. And then, again, you're fighting people that are tough that also do this for a job. And even if you're, the superior martial artist on some level, you never know. I mean, anything can happen in any sort of a game. And fighting is a lot more like March Madness than it is, let's say, for instance, like a postseason basketball series. And as a result, there's a lot more volatility there. So you can't even necessarily guarantee that you can't bank on, being able to walk home with the winner's check, even if you are, you would ordinarily say 8 out of 10 times, I think I would get this done. So you're putting out a lot of money. You're putting out a lot of personal exposure. And then you have to hope that the stars align. And sometimes it does, or sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I guess from a series of angles, I can absolutely see where Al is coming from. Now, I would suggest, to him perhaps that, when you're looking to get paid more, sometimes getting up on the mic and cursing at people is probably not the way to do it. I can absolutely see where he's coming from. But if you're waiting for Nike or whomever all to come along, you're probably going to be waiting a while. I don't think Leo Messi's ever going to do that, so I think that maybe he damages the validity of his position a little bit. That being said, I'm sure he's been feeling a little bit frustrated for a long time, and I absolutely think he has quite a bit of ground to stand on.
Yeah, you think that the way in which he's doing it is not the correct way? Because to counter that, I would say that it's getting a lot of attention. And you bring up Lionel Messi. I don't think Raging Al thinks that he's ever going to get Lionel Messi money. So he's probably saying to himself, how am I going to hurt myself with Nike and Reebok? I'm not getting money from those guys anyway. So in a way, I would almost say it's quite effective. You're going to turn some people off with, I guess, the language that you're using, but at the same time, you're really going to generate some headlines and some interest. And I think that's really sort of the first move, the first step in getting something done about it, right? You just have to create a buzz about it. And I will say that Iaquinta is doing that.
I can't disagree with you there. And I absolutely, again, like none of us are ever going to see anything approaching Lionel Messi money. One, because of the sport's not at the development level. And two, let's get serious. Lionel Messi is better at soccer than anybody in the world is at MMA. But at the same time, it's I guess it's tough because I've considered that a lot myself, actually. You look at a guy, let's say in Raging Al's situation, where he's obviously been a very successful fighter. I want to say he's 8-2 in the UFC, plus the 4 fights that he's won on the Ultimate Fighter. That is a heck of a record, and he's not been in there with bumps. He's beaten tough guys, and at the same time, though, you wonder if you'll end up becoming the sacrificial lamb that got the attention for the next group of people that walked in there with a suit and tie. And not being a suit and tie guy myself, I'm speculating. I'm not really sure. On the one hand, I'm glad to see that that it's getting, what he's doing and what he's done is bringing more light onto the issue. That being said, I'd like to see it steer to a positive resolution for him one way or another, and I hope that he carefully considers how he can best do that.
What do you think ends up happening with Al? And what do you think are the conversations going on at the UFC headquarters, I guess? I mean, if they're going to try and make this guy pay, which I'm not even so sure that that's necessarily going to be their mindset. I know that a lot of people jump to that conclusion like, oh, they're going to make Al pay for this. A lot of times, I remember talking to Tim Kennedy, who was very outspoken about the UFC and some of its business practices, and he straight up told me, no, I've never felt really awkward. I've never, been mistreated during a fight week because I'm outspoken and I speak my mind. And Al has basically said if they try to come at me with, Eddie Alvarez or Dustin Poirier, a top 10 guy, and I'm getting paid $26,000 to show, I'm not going to take that fight anyway because I'm just not going to accept it. So in a way, he's risking some things. In another way, I just think, it's a big, flashy headline this week. And then what happens? Nothing really. I think the UFC is going to continue to offer Al fights, and if he's not happy with them, he's going to say no. And that's just kind of where the story ends. Do you see it differently?
No, honestly, I have a hard time arguing with you there because, Brett, I think that at the end of the day, really, where does the power lie? I think that the UFC or any other organization will move when they are forced to move. And, one man or any 10 people sitting there and saying, hey, I'm dissatisfied with what's going on here, they recognize, rightly, frankly, that they can probably ride out most bad press. And, look at other athletes, other situations in other sports, other organizations, anything. If time heals all wounds on a certain level, and, the level of exposure that, let's say, for instance, a professional fighter has, is actually very limited because, let's take a guy like Al, who's a very tough guy, excellent fighter. He's getting attention right now. Why? Because he just fought. And he can get out there and he can speak and he can do his thing. But, for the casual fan, I would imagine, they're hearing about him now, but it's not like he's Russell Westbrook out there complaining. And forget the profile. I'm not bringing up Russell as a means of saying, oh, he's higher profile. Although that would also help too. It's that you see Russell Westbrook for a period of 4 or 5 months, like 2-3 nights a week, easy. When it comes to a fighter, you see him when you see him. So unless you're talking about the truly transcendent characters in our sport at this point, the John Joneses, the George St. Pierre's, the Conor McGregors, I think it might be an out of sight, out of mind thing where even though this person is correct and has a point, the organization realizes that they don't have to act. And it is interesting. I think it would take a class action type of situation in order for that to change, but I just don't see that really occurring. And then to your point, that Al's not really hurting himself. And I've never heard anything about the UFC mistreating people. I can only say that, the best things about, people like Sean Shelby, the staff that works behind the scenes, they are unbelievably kind and professional and good. And at the end of the day, you're getting into a fist fight with somebody else that that trains to beat you up. So I think that if anything, punishment is just like maybe they'll just, go, man, I hope this guy loses. But at a certain point, as you said, no one can force you to sign the contract. And, speaking personally, if someone offered me a fight in the top 10 for garbage money, I would probably take it because I'm not making a whole ton of money anyway. And as a result, it's more about the opportunity to challenge yourself. When you're talking about Al, who wants to be in this for the long haul and is doing other things there, fighting Eddie Alvarez for $20,000 is ridiculous. It is a slap in the face, and that is one of the other things that you have to balance because when the UFC has obvious tiers to it, I think, and some of the lower caliber, martial arts athletes, they're frankly, a fight is a fight and you never know what can happen, but they're a heck of a lot safer to fight. You can get in and out of there without getting too chewed up a lot of times. You go in there and you fight Jose Aldo, you may get out of there like Conor McGregor did that one time, but I think that's no different than Cub Swanson getting knocked out by Jose those years ago with that flying knee. I would never bet to have that happen again. And doesn't mean that it couldn't, but more times than not, both of those guys are going to get out of there looking like they've been in a heck of a fight. And then you start saying to yourself, man, am I absorbing so much risk relative to the benefit that it's not really worth it to be involved in this? And that's a question that each of us has to answer for himself.
Yeah, and you say that all of you have to answer that for yourself, and I'm sure you have those conversations internally and with the people around you. And fans and media, they talk about this sometimes, and that okay, so why don't more fighters come to Al's aid? Why don't they retweet Al Iaquinta tells the UFC to go F themselves? Why doesn't on the next UFC card everybody on the prelim is wearing like a pin that says I'm with Al? Why does that not happen? Why are we still waiting for that, I guess?
Honestly, it's hard to say. It's one of the reasons that I roll my eyes a little bit every single time I hear about a fighters union. Not that I don't think it's a great idea, just that I don't see the execution occurring, because it ends up being, I don't know how to put it other than in a lot of cases, people are a little bit short-sighted, and I'm not saying that I'm beyond that ever myself, obviously, but you have to be willing to fall on your sword or self-immolate in order to get anything done in this world, in my opinion. And if you know that I'm not willing to do that, that gives you immense power over me, because you can act in a pretty draconian fashion knowing that there are lines that I won't cross because I'm ultimately self-interested. One of the things that I've liked about Al's situation is that to a certain extent, it's self-interested. On another level, he's not making too many friends, with the bosses, by doing that sort of thing. And, as a result, he's putting himself out there, and I just don't see a lot of other people being willing to do that. And it's unfortunate, because it's just like negotiation. Unless you're willing to walk away from the table and not fight ever again and go do something else with your life, it's going to be difficult for you to get maybe what your due or what you feel your due is. And speaking personally, I really love fighting. I think it's an amazing opportunity to compete in the UFC. It is the best organization in the world, and the best fighters, for the most part, are there. It's the best organization, the best production. That's the best thing I've ever been a part of as a martial artist. That being said, clearly there are issues there, and I would walk away in a heartbeat if it doesn't make sense. However, you have thousands of people who are would beg, borrow, and steal their way in, and would easily try to replace you. And the problem is, I think, replacing Derek Jeter, not an easy thing to do, because even if I want to find that man, I don't know where you find another Derek Jeter. I haven't seen one in the league since he's left. Doesn't mean that he's not, there aren't other great players, but, the whole total package. Replacing a John Jones, not an easy thing to do. Replacing a George St. Pierre. Replacing a mid-card guy, the way that the UFC sells itself at this point, which is more of an entertainment thing than a sport, basically I don't think I'm blonde enough or have big enough or have abs,